And with that, let's get into our learning outcomes. As you can see, we're going to take a look at physical forms first, discuss the following classifications. And this is really in reference in very general terms now to the activity associated with waste. Low-level waste being one category, high-level waste, and then transuranic waste. There are a couple of little subdivisions within a couple of those that we're going to discuss because you may encounter them, and they seem to be more and more a prevalent way of looking at some of this. So we do need to introduce them, but these are the three big ones that we're going to really dig into. When we start looking at how do we process some of these wastes, and we'll be looking at, in terms of the liquid and gaseous radioactivity release paths. We can't get into too detail because some of these are very, in fact all of it's very site and plant specific. How do they do it? So we kind of have to lump it into a general category or a general process for handling them, and that's the way we're going to approach that. But we'll be looking at the normal release paths, radiation monitors, some off-site dose calculations, not necessarily from the standpoint of calculations that you have to be able to perform, but rather calculations that are performed by the facility in the course of releasing some radioactive material to the environment. And that's all done within the tech specs and license and all that's associated with the facility. But associated with those will be some notifications and actions for abnormal releases, and then just a general covering of the tech specs for environmental classifications. We're also going to look at some different processing methods associated with liquid waste. Again, not in a lot of strict details because there's so many different processes that are out there, but rather in general sense, such as use of evaporators, what we do with evaporator bottoms, what our evaporator bottoms, what we do with a sick classroom. You're the reason I'm sick, right? Yeah, bless you. But in all of this, we're processing the liquid. We're also going to generate some demineralizer resins. We'll talk a little bit about how do we take care of handling that. And then in that also we'll be looking at solid waste and some of the things that are done really because of the bottom line and cost associated with it. There's a lot of effort out there to come up with new technologies for volume reduction because it typically is charged on a cubic foot basis as far as disposal of it, getting rid of it, burying it. And so trying to get that cubic foot down that you have to deal with is a bottom line money saver. We'll talk about that. But there's a lot of different ways you can do it. Minimizing the amount, segregating, wrapping, cleaning material, action, use of a hot tool room, minimizing what you take into a radiological controller. Don't generate it to begin with. That's the idea. Yeah. And then we're going to look at the radioactive waste compactor. That is one method. Been around for a while. We do need to talk about the radiological aspect of that. And then as far as the reg, we're probably going to focus most of our time on CFR 61 with maybe a couple of side trips off to a couple of other regs. 61 is our big one because from a non-DOE perspective, we have to satisfy the packaging and classification requirements for disposal at the land disposal burial site, and which means we have to meet, when we're packaging up and preparing for shipment, we have to meet that criteria because we're going to ship it off to them and they won't take it if it has not met that criteria. So we need to understand how that is because that dictates and directs a lot of what we do as far as preparing rad waste for shipping. And so we'll spend a bit of time on CFR 61 looking at that, especially in the classification waste, as well as packaging. Outline-wise, physical forms, take a look at the regulatory classifications. I didn't have this one up there, but we're going to talk about it briefly. Mixed hazardous waste, solid waste treatment, liquid waste treatment, and gaseous waste treatment. And of course, questions along the way. The bottom line, basically, for rad waste. Give me a general definition of rad waste. Just a general definition. What would you call it?
Radioactive material you no longer have a use for.
Right. It's trash, right? It's radioactive material that no longer has a useful purpose. Really, it's the leftovers. It's the leftovers from the use of radioactive material in either power production or medical treatment, maybe even in DOE activities, national defense activities. It's the leftovers. It's things that no longer have a useful life. The interesting thing is they can either be naturally occurring or man-made. Now, most of the time, the things that we're associated with, the power plant, we're not really talking about naturally occurring. Radioisotopes that we have to deal with is typically all generated from our activities. And pretty much DOE that's processed out there, it's all as a result of the activities that are done on site and harvesting plutonium for the bombs or cleaning up the legacy waste or whatever's being done out there. It all is a result of the activities. But if you look at the fuel cycle, and that's why it's part of your reading, if you look at the nuclear fuel cycle, it does involve the naturally occurring radioactive material. There are wastes associated with that process. And because of that, it can be naturally occurring waste. You say, well, if it's naturally occurring, why is it waste? Because it's a result of a process that we're using to harvest this uranium for fuel. And so it's the leftovers that are resulting, concentrated in concentrations that otherwise it wouldn't be there if it were not for us harvesting that ore. And so we have to disposition it. We have to treat it as radioactive waste, and there's specific regs and guides on doing that. Certain portions of what we do does fall under the different regulatory agencies, and we've already talked about agreement states, so you understand the philosophy there that there's 32 agreement states that basically have a letter of agreement or memorandum of understanding with the NRC, that they'll satisfy the licensing requirements for certain activities for certain facilities. Power plants are not included in agreement state. However, some of the waste that we deal with, especially in the medical facility, do come under the requirements of the agreement states, are controlled or cognizant of the agreement states, so we have to take those into consideration too. So that's part of the introduction there. DOE obviously is responsible for waste generated as a result of their activities, not only the harvesting of plutonium for the bombs and tritium for the nuclear arsenal, but also a lot of research that has been done through the national laboratories. It does generate a considerable amount of waste, and some of it quite exotic from the standpoint of you won't see it anywhere else except the DOE facility. The rest of it, the NRC has cognizance over. Basically, the commercial and health sciences, and basically the non-military use of nuclear material comes under control of the NRC. And as we've discussed from time to time, there are plenty of agencies that are involved with it. EPA has a certain role in this, as does the Department of Transportation. In our next major lecture series, we'll dig into the DOT and all of those regulations and their facility. Also, Health and Human Services has a little bit in there. So you can see that it's a regulated industry, certainly, but it does have a clear definition of responsibility for different segments of the radioactive waste. management, storage, disposal of rad waste produced by licensees. Got it? No, it's okay. Yeah. That grandmother just passed away. So, any of you are close to her, you might check in with her later. See how she's doing. Okay, physical forms. Physical forms of rad waste. That is referring to the natural form that whether it be liquid, solid, or gas. And we do deal with all three. Solid waste really is the contaminated pieces and parts that are no longer have a useful life. You can look at it in terms of trash if you want to. Equipment, structures are included in it. Plastic, paper, even components that have become irradiated. And herein is why you want to be a little careful when you start thinking in terms of activity, because in the solid waste you can have anything from really just barely detectable contamination on an item all the way up to per hour on an item. And so from that standpoint, it covers the full range of radiological hazard. So don't try, try to keep that in your mind. Don't narrow and say, well, solid rad waste is low-level rad waste. Not necessarily. It can be considerably high level as far as dose rates and hazards are concerned. We also include in the solid waste things like tank sludge and salt waste, some of what Jerry's plant out there deals with. Legacy waste comes from the tank farms. The leftover stuff is processed out of those tanks. Highly radioactive, but it's a solid waste that has to be processed. And there's some specific methods by which that is accomplished, and we're going to be looking at some of those as we get into all of this. And then, as I was saying a while ago, the residue from the milling and the mining of uranium and thorium ores, they call them tailings. And that's just the general term that they give them, the residue from these mills. And even though it is naturally occurring, you've concentrated it by processing the ores, and you've created a localized area of these millings that this residue that has to be dispositioned. And there are specific regulations regarding that, as well as processes and methods by which they can process it, more or less stabilize it in place. That's what most of them do. Other physical forms, of course, liquid waste. Liquid waste discharges from various parts of the nuclear power plant. It is a liquid system, right? When you're using water to generate steam, you condense that steam and try to reuse the water, but you have processes that use that water for different things. And it can be cleaned up, and in most cases it is processed to clean it up, but there are still residual radioactive isotopes that are present in the water, and it has to be processed and ultimately discharged from the plant. You also have waste that comes from the reprocessing plants. Now, we don't necessarily have that problem in this country because we haven't taken that step of reprocessing our fuel yet. We're working on it. That's what our box out there is going to allow us to do. When H Canyon was in full swing, that's what it did. It processed the fuel from the production reactors and would send the fuel through and dissolve it, and, you know, sort out and separate and get the plutonium and the uranium and the this and that, and I like this part, I like that part, but I don't like this part. It was a miracle what they did out there, really, through chemistry and some of the technology that they used. Ultimately, there's going to be, again, liquid waste, or aqueous waste that's discharged from that. And that's what wound up in those tanks out there. And most of the liquid is being processed or has been processed off of it. What's left is the salts. And then we have gaseous waste. Gas comes from effluents resulting from the operation of nuclear power plants and again from fuel processing plants. The natural, some of the natural, natural's not the right word, fission process produces fission product gases. Some of the fission fragments, the radioactive isotopes that are generated are gaseous in nature. And once when they're generated, they pretty much are in solution with the liquid under pressure. But once you depressurize it, the gases come out of solution and they have to be processed. They're still radioactive, and because of that, they have to be handled as a radioactive waste. And there are some specific things that can be done and are done by design to process the gaseous waste. We'll talk about that. But you can see some of the isotopes, xenon-133, krypton-85, tritium is a gas, iodine-131. Those are all gaseous products coming from either power operation or the fuel processing. So those are the physical forms. After we get through some of the classifications and look at some of the regs, we're going to come back and look at a little bit more detail on the actual what is done to process for each of those three physical forms. We'll take a look at the solids, volume reduction techniques, and things like that that are taken through processing, and likewise for the liquid and the gas. So we'll come back to how do we process, how do we handle it. Any questions on the physical forms? Let's move into, oh, that's right, I just added this. This is just, you've seen this before in some of your previous ones, but it kind of gives you a breakdown of these three waste streams, and that's what they would be called. There's our waste streams: liquid rad waste, solid rad waste, and gaseous rad waste. And gives you just in a general sense how it is processed. And this is what we'll be coming back to this when we cover the individual processing. But I just want to kind of refresh your memory on this, on those three main waste streams and what's done with them. Solid rad waste is probably not as complete as it needs to be. In fact, it's not. And we'll add to that when we get into discussing. Now, as far as regulatory classifications of waste, there's three general categories that waste can be brought down to, and that's the low-level waste, the transuranic waste, and the high-level waste. And its position on this pyramid gives you some indication of the relative volume of each of those that's generated. Low-level rad waste being the major category, if you will, but as far as volume is concerned, that's generated in all of the industries, whether it be power industry or department, DOE. By and large, most of it is low-level waste. So we're going to start there. Low-level waste contains minimal radioactivity, and again, I want to caution you, when we say minimal activity, it doesn't mean that it's just barely contaminated. It means in a big picture sort of way, as I showed you on that pyramid, from an activity standpoint, it contains the least. Specific activity standpoint, maybe that might put it in. It's got fairly low specific activity. It normally would not require shielding. It can be handled by direct contact. However, there are times when it can be quite radioactive and would require shielding and would not be handled directly. But by and large, based on the volume that's generated, most of it you can handle directly. Because the volume is so great, most of the time that's what happens. The radioactivity can range from just above background, what we can find in nature, to very highly radioactive, which would be the case in some of the component parts that are discarded as being no longer useful. Something that would have been in the reactor vessel, for example, would probably likely be very highly radioactive. It may still fall in the category of being what low-level waste. But normally, you're going to find it that we would not see too much of that occurring. One example I can give you is a lot of the plants are undergoing steam generator replacements now. And a steam generator, you should all know what that is. You've been through NET. The old one is considered low-level waste. Even though at one time it had radioactive liquid circulating through the inside of the tubes, it is considered low-level waste, just simply based on the specific activity. Now, most of those old generators, the used ones, they're mothballed and they're put into a mausoleum on campus or on site, and just stored on site. That's where they're kept. They're usually not even buried, just simply because of the cost that would be involved. But they are considered low-level waste by classification. Normally, low-level waste, it says is normally stored on-site by the licensee until it's either decayed away or there's a sufficient quantity that would warrant the transportation to some disposal. Most hospitals certainly follow that. When they generate waste, radioactive waste, they'll have it on their property somewhere where it's stored in a secured room where dose rates are typically very low, and so they store it until and in most cases the isotopes that they're using are short-lived enough that they'll decay away, and ultimately 30 days later you go back and it's not radioactive anymore. So a lot of hospitals, research facilities, things like that, universities, they have a storage area where they store for decay, store for disposal, and whatever other category fits what they're trying to do, and they manage their waste in that way. When stored for disposal gets high enough, enough volume, then they'll arrange with a third party to come in and pick it up and process it. In a power facility, that's not the case. Most of the activity is fairly long-lived, and it will be stored. And ultimately, most of the power plants right now are using third-party vendors that will take their waste. It's still, this is an interesting concept here, because the waste, even though you give it to a third party, it still belongs to you as the licensee. Okay, so what they do is they take it to their facility, they process it, and process it it depends on the material and what you're trying to do with it, but in some cases it's incineration. They'll burn it and collect all the ash. In some cases it's compaction, and we're talking about a super compactor, not your typical under the counter trash compactor. But they'll compact it. Whatever the process is, they'll put it all together and then they ship it back to you. So you may start out with 2 semi-loads full of consumable, compactable waste or incinerable waste, and you come back, you got one 55-gallon drum. Okay? Because they burn it. It's all ash now, right? And then, what the facilities will do is they'll either set it aside and store it, and when they get enough for a shipment, they'll put together a shipment out to one of the burial sites. And they'll pay for that 55-gallon drum versus 3 semi-trailer loads. It's a cost saving. And you fill up the burial sites, then what are you going to do? So we don't want to fill them up. We want to compress, compact, and volume reduce as much as we can. Regardless, that is one way of handling the low-level waste, and it really does vary a lot by the facility that we're talking about. Anything that's transported, obviously, would be in containers that are approved by the DOT. And again, we'll pick that up when we get to transportation. And as I was just saying, some parties or some licensee will use a third-party waste processor to reduce it. Now, since we've talked a little bit about burial sites, let's talk a little bit more about that. Most of this, as it is processed, and as I've said, you get it together and you're ready to get rid of it from your site, you send it to a burial site. And most of the burial sites are what are called near-surface burial, near-surface facilities or burial sites. The whole way that we handle low-level waste right now came across in 1985 when there became a concern about really we really didn't have a program in the nation to take care of the low-level waste. And how was it going to happen? At that time, there were There were 3 burial sites, and one of them is right here in South Carolina. One of them's in Richmond, and the third one that was open at the time was in Nevada. And basically what you would do is, say at a power plant, you would negotiate with one of those 3 burial sites, and you'd send it to the one that would do it for the cheapest. And South Carolina wanting the business, they were getting a lot of business. But the problem was we were filling up the burial sites. And the prices were being bid down low, and so it made more sense to go ahead and just ship it and bury it than to do any type of volume reduction, because it was cheaper to do it that way. Well, since we really didn't have a way of taking care of equalizing all of this out, and since South Carolina would do business with whoever they wanted to do business with, and Richmond would do, whoever they would want to do business with, and the one in Nevada, I can't remember what the name of it was at the time, but there were some states that didn't have a clear path to send their material, either because of economics or whatever. But anyway, they passed this Low-Level Policy Act of 1985, and it established some points. One is that states are responsible for their own low-level waste. On a state-by-state basis, each state is responsible for taking care of their own waste. They can join with other states. In fact, they were encouraged to join with other states to form compacts. And the idea was that you'd team up with your next-door neighbor, and the Southeast region would have a compact, and we would have a burial site and located in a central place, and all the members of your compact would ship to that. And then likewise, there would be one up for north or east, and so on. That was the idea. And the idea was that the states would develop these disposal sites, and as an incentive, they could exclude waste from other sites. In other words, South Carolina didn't have to take waste from Arkansas. They could say, we're only going to take it from our compact. And that would help them manage their space. They wouldn't, run out of space and have to close burial site and then lose all that economic advantage. They could regulate it. They could manage it. Right now, most states have entered into compacts. However, there have been no new facilities open since the act was passed. Actually, there was the one in Nevada closed. because there's another one open back up in Utah, so we remain at 3. We remain at 3. The compacts you can see here, and it's, go figure, I don't know how it worked. Here's our burial sites. We've got burial site in Richland, Washington, in Clive, Utah, right here, and in Barnwell, South Carolina.
Did they find like a leak or something in Barnwell near the burial site?
Recently?
I think so. Not like very recently, a couple years ago.
Yeah, possibly. I don't know. But what I want you to see is the compacts and how they split up. Here's the Southwestern compact, the Rocky Mountain compact, the Northwest, Midwest.
Texas.
Here's the Texas compact. Go figure. I don't know how that came about. The Central compact, Southeast compact, and you'll notice South Carolina is not in the Southeast compact. South Carolina is in the Atlantic compact. South Carolina and New Jersey and Connecticut. I don't know. The blue ones, if I'm not mistaken, are unaffiliated. They have not aligned themselves with a specific compact yet. This is as of January 2007, and I don't think anything has come about since then. Yeah.
Just from the economic standpoint of this whole compact business, South Carolina was driving price point down so that they could get more business. Does the act actually control, regulate the prices?
Actually, the act, I don't think, regulates the prices.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting, especially how it came out in South Carolina being aligned with two of the Asian states. I think that's how that happened. But it happened, and they can accept shipments from other, okay? But it's within the control of the compact to dictate whether they do or don't.
How much money they offer, maybe, or how much money that they're willing to pay.
Yeah, exactly. Now, what you're finding out is most processors, Clive, Utah does a really good business. You'll see that there's actually 2 in the Northwest. They have 2 burial sites. But they are licensed by the NRC, and there are restrictions on those licenses on what they can and cannot accept. And I've got a little note here about that. In the Barnwell is run by Energy Solutions. Clive Operations is also run by Energy Solutions. The one in Richland is run by U.S. Ecology. According to this, and this is from the NRC website as of today, Barnwell accepts waste from all U.S. generators except those in Rocky Mountain and Northwest compacts. It's licensed by the state of Carolina to accept waste in Class A, B, and C. That's all 3 classes of low-level waste. And that'll mean more when we get to Tennessee FR 60. We'll talk about what that means. But A being lower and C being high level. Richland accepts all classes, A through C, and that's licensed by the state of Washington. Clive, Utah only accepts Class A waste, which is low level. That's more the contaminated paper and things that have been incinerated.
What about places like Canada? I mean, do they have any kind of affiliate? Yeah, like they're kind of like right on our borders and such.
You're talking international now, Chris.
Plenty open country.
Well, the answer is no. We don't have any international waste agreements. It's pretty much a national thing. You stick with it. You make it, you got it. Now, I will say this, that the Department of Energy has entered into agreements with other countries in helping them disposition some of their orphan sources. You know, some of these medical sources that shouldn't be out there in public because of the terrorist threat. And so that our Department of Energy has worked with their governments to help them process it. Some of those, if I'm not mistaken, have wound up in Savannah River or on an interim basis until they're processed. But that's all, that's something totally outside the scope of what we're talking about here. And as you can see, just to put it in a spread out perspective, there are the 3 burial sites. And when I was in Arkansas, Barnwell was fully open. Even after the compact form, they were still accepting. And so we would be sending a lot of our waste there. They started restricting it, and then Clive opened back up, so we started sending waste out to Clive. Said Clive can only take type A, and so if you've got anything that's above type A, you've got to start entering it into some type of agreement with these 2 locations, or you wind up storing it on your plant site. And that's what a lot of them are doing with their used generators. And they do build up a structure capable of withstanding, was it 5 hurricane, but what's the maximum tornado? 3? Something like that. Anyway, structures have got to be able to withstand all that stuff. And, not that you're worried about the steam generator blowing around, but the weather and the rain and stuff could have some impact on it.
F3.
F3? Okay, F3 is the biggie.
I was questioning you.
Oh, I don't know. That's why I was asking you. I really don't know. They've got to be environmentally qualified buildings, is my point. They've got to be able to withstand some harsh weather. As far as what do most of the waste disposal sites look like, it's nothing really more than a big open pit. Now, not to minimize the qualifications of these areas, because they have to be geologically selected and qualified. They have to have a certain soil composition, and the actual construction of the pit is pretty involved as well. But usually a high clay environment that minimizes groundwater intrusion. And Tennessee FR 61 is very specific about some of the things that they go into licensing these, and I'll talk about that here in a second. But this gives you just, in fact, this would be a small one. Most of these pits are huge, I mean, enormous. But you can see this has several containers in it, and what this is backfill sand is put over the top of it. And then when they're ready to close this, what they would do is they overlay it with clay, compacted, and there would be some type of groundwater monitoring system set up where they can sample the groundwater on a periodic basis to see if there's any weepage or leakage from the containers. And there also has to be some type of intrusion barrier, such that 500 years from now, someone setting up a housing development is not going to put a bunch of homes on top of it. Tennessee FR 61 is very specific about that. Now, as far as activity by disposal, I want to give you some idea of the volume. This is from 2008. This is from the NRC webpage, and that's the most recent data they've got out there. But you can see Clive has a pretty good volume. They've received a lot of volume, which tells you something. If they can only receive type A, most of the volume is very low level stuff. Not much activity at all. In fact, you can see that for 2 billion cubic feet, you've only got 4,000, almost 5,000 curies. It's not much when you look at some of this other. Barnwell, on the other hand, 22,000. Look at the number of curies. Okay, which tells you that most of what's going in there is type B and type C, the higher activity stuff. And here, Richland's kind of, okay, probably a pretty good mixture of B, probably mostly B. But you can see the total volume generated in 2008. Most of it went to flag. But most of the activity came to Barnwell. Now, as far as 10 CFR 61 is concerned, just a little bit about it, and then we'll leave, come back next time. But 10 CFR 61 is the primary low-level rad waste disposal regulation. A lot of materials in there. It really does accomplish a lot. If a state or a company decides that they want to open up a burial site, they have to be licensed by the state or the NRC, and it has to be accomplished and licensed in accordance with this 10 CFR 61. All three of the current burial sites, as we've already noted, are operating off of a state license and not the NRC license, because they are all three in three states. And here in general is what 10 CFR talks about the content of the license application, how to go about filling that out. So if you've got a lot of land somewhere and you're thinking about opening up a burial site, 10 CFR 61 is where you start. It tells you how to fill out the license application. It also talks about the waste classification, the A, B, and C that we've been referring to. And we'll talk about that later. Dig into that. And then that should be site suitability requirements. This tells you about the type of geological work that's got to be done, and hydrological work or characteristics of the site have to be satisfied in order to be an approved site. There are specific objectives that have to be met by any site, and that's what you see listed here. During its operation and post-operation, it has to be constructed in such a manner that no member of the general public will receive more than 25 mil room in a year. It has to have provision for protection against inadvertent intrusion. Goes back to what I was talking about 500 years after they close that trench. There's got to be something in place that will ensure that there won't be an inadvertent intrusion until they won't start digging and then suddenly find out that they're in a burial site. There's got to be specific provision, processes, and procedures in place for protection of workers during operations. They operate just like we would at a power facility. If you're an RP tech there, PLDs, work plans, RWPs, ALARA goals, dose budgets, the whole 9 yards, just like what you would be. Here's another place you may consider employment. They use RP technicians, and they're the same qualifications as what you're going through right now. So, another place. It also stipulates that 10 CFR 61 stipulates that there will be state and tribal participation. And tribal is referring to any native American Indian tribes that may own the land. And it's 10 CFR 61 basically just ensures that their government, tribal head, president, chief, whatever the proper title is involved and engaged in the operation, construction and operation of the site. And also, this is really common, financial assurances, basically that there's money backing up the operation, that is not going to get started and get a bunch of holes dug out there with radioactive material in it, and then the company goes bankrupt and just leaves it. There's got to be some trust fund, if you will, in place that assures that if anything like that ever occurs, that there's enough money somewhere for a trustee to take control and charge of it and make sure that the site is dispositioned properly. And then, of course, records, reports, inspections, all of that goes with it. That's probably where we can stop for tonight. Any questions?